But what I'm actually really excited about is what generative AI can do when it comes to like creating style of games which we haven't seen before. And the reason I say that is when I look at generative AI, all the shortcomings of generative AI, which we talk about today, that it's stochastic, it's not consistent. You can give it the same prompt and you'll get two different answers. Sometimes it quote unquote hallucinates. They don't work for mission critical applications, right? Like, if whether you are in enterprise or sales or making big decisions, you can't use those. But for video games, if you can harness it for delight, where it makes the game a lot more serendipitous, it makes you playing the same game over and over again because each time you play it, it's something slightly different. So I actually think generative AI has this, and transformer-based generative AI, these models, they have this feature of serendipity. It's a bug in other settings, but actually a delight for games.
You have a very interesting background, and I definitely want to get into what you've done in the past and what you're doing now as well, but also provide a lot of context on sort of the gaming sector, the growth of gaming, the growth of AI and all that stuff. But I think it's a good start would probably be good to talk about a little bit about the metaverse. I know that everything is all meta nowadays and there's a lot of stuff happening, but sometimes it can be a bit of a strange area to learn about. I think for those who are thinking, who've learnt about the name metaverse, obviously they associate that with Facebook, but they probably don't understand a bit more about the background of what the metaverse actually is. And this will obviously go into the gaming space as well, into VR and all that stuff. But do you want to just maybe give a high level on what the metaverse is and what it's all about?
Yeah, just starting from the beginning on the origin of the term itself, the term actually comes from Neil Stephenson's book Snow Crash. It's now over 30 years old. 30 years ago is when it came out. And it described this large connected world, just large connected world where people were online all the time. There was a replica economy of the physical world in this online world. I think that's the origin. If you want something a bit more modern, Ready Player One, both the book and the movie does a pretty good job. Now, if you go from pop culture into what metaverse actually is, I think Matthew Ball, and I'm happy to share the link to where he defined it, he does a pretty good job of like defining what metaverse is. And I think, and so I'll talk a little bit about what he says, but viewers should also check out what he wrote directly. I think he talks about this large scale world which is persistent, can have large number of people in it at the same time, is interoperable, where you can move between different worlds and keep your identity and keep ownership of your digital assets across this world. And it's something which spans both your VR or fully immersed world, your AR, which is where you are overlaying digital objects on physical world, and online internet as we know it today. And I think that's probably a really good definition and an ambitious definition of metaverse. Where I'll step from it is, just stepping back from it a little bit. I think what I'll share is people get almost too caught up in how ambitious metaverse is and sometimes forget about what core value, like using the systems of today, what core value or experiences you can build today, which can deliver on that promise. And so I like to sort of narrow it down even further to basically three things, where can you give your customers or players or viewers a synchronous social experience where there are multiple people? Doesn't matter if it's 10 or 100,000, depending on your application, but can you give them a synchronous connected experience? Can it be persistent? And by persistent, I mean when you and I are together in a virtual world, when we do things, when we create new objects, make changes, those persist. Like even after we log off, we persist. And the third is, do we and others have agency around creating content and sharing? So I think of those simplified into those three things. And by the way, games already do that today. Like if you look at Fortnite, it already does all of these things, or Minecraft, or Roblox, or even smaller mobile games. They all have these elements, and that has value in its own. When it comes to helping people connect and giving people a place to hang out. So again, I think the larger vision is amazing, well defined, but there are things you can do today.
Got it. Yeah, I feel like there's definitely an element of all of those aspects, because I get the sense that what the metaverse is trying to do is really proliferate this idea of, you mentioned synchronization, you mentioned community as well, and bring all of those elements together. Games have obviously been around for such a long time, but this is sort of the next evolution in what not necessarily gaming is all about. I think gaming has a branch to that if you talk about the metaverse tree, but I think metaverse is obviously more about community than everything else, and communicating over the digital world in a very seamless and interactive way. But I feel like there's also a sense that the metaverse could be something bigger as well, something more profound as well. In terms of just talking about the metaverse, how do you see the metaverse changing over time, and what are your expectations about what the metaverse could look like in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. So one thing I think, so when it comes to changing, I mean, again, the way I think of like how you access it, that's going to change. That's evolved and will continue to evolve. Like I think you can. Today when people think of metaverse, they think of like you have to be fully immersed. I have a slightly different view where you can access this metaverse through your phone, through your web, and through your headsets. Now, with Apple's announcement on their mixed reality headset, their Vision Pro, it's an expensive device, but over a period of 5 to 10 years, you would expect that the price would come down. It's starting off at $3,500. I think the prices will come down. Meta, where I worked in my past and launched Rift, I think they continue to sort of bring out newer and newer devices. So on one hand, you'll see a lot more compelling immersive devices as a way to access these persistent experiences. The second way I think it'll change is, right now, metaverse type experiences, by and large, only exist in video games, like online games. And I do think they'll start to proliferate other applications, whether it's things in fashion or retail, or even more enterprise, quote unquote, metaverses, where you can have a digital replica of of a warehouse floor, where you are seeing, you're seeing the real-time simulation, which is captured through all of these cameras, like video cameras, sensors, compositing all together, rendering it down as a movie, where you can have a real-time, almost in sync digital replica. And I think of those as like more enterprise style use cases. There are also applications which you'll see where people are trying to simulate entire cities. So I think you'll see a lot more of those. I think education is another one. Over again, like when I project out 5 to 10 years, um, with what we are seeing both in AI, which will unlock personalized tutoring at scale, um, us spending more and more time, kids spending more and more time in games and getting used to that 3D world. So, I do think there'll be interesting applications for education in this metaverse as well. Now, there are things which I actually feel like are harder to solve, and think, my personal view is, um, instead of waiting too long to get them solved, we should get moving. And so these are things like, can we have the same identity which the user owns and takes it across these different experiences along with digital assets? That's like harder to solve. And not because the technology is hard, it's because people are hard, and getting organizations to work with each other, that's just like so hard. Like all kinds of incentives come in. So I think that will be harder to solve. What will also be harder to solve is this true interoperability, where you have an avatar in Fortnite, will it work in a different game? Today it doesn't. And it might not for next 5 to 10 years. What might also be harder to solve is, can you get a million people at very high fidelity and very realistic rendering of the world in the same place? And and I think that's okay, because again, like coming back to like the practicality of like what concepts of metaverse can you slice and do today, and um, over next 5 to 10 years, I think that's value enough.
Yeah, I think you touched on a really bunch of interesting points, and you mentioned sort of the enterprise level with the metaverse, and there's this whole thing concept of like the digital twin, and being able to sort of immerse yourself into a factory floor or a warehouse or some sort of industrial area, and then you can real time see things that are sort of if there's alarms going off, there's sensors, and you can sort of immerse yourself in that entire simulated world. I feel like the metaverse is becoming much more important and much more significant than beyond gaming, and all the things you mentioned about education, about real world interactions with people, meetings, have virtual meetings with each other as well over Zoom, and potentially doing podcasts where you can put on a VR headset, and then I would be able to see you and see me just like we're having coffee at a cafe or something like that. I think those are really incredible experiences that the metaverse is opening to all of us, and I'm looking forward to figuring out exactly what that looks like. I think the other thing as well is, going back to the gaming side of things, you personally had a interesting technology background going into it. Do you want to just maybe touch on a little bit about your experience and your journey going into sort of the metaverse, into gaming, into sort of the entire industry as well? I think there's a lot of young folks out there who are playing a lot of games, and they just they find it so exciting to be part of this, whatever this is happening right now, and they didn't realize that you could make a career out of it, which is really awesome. So how did you get into gaming yourself, and we can go from there.
Yeah, so I don't want to disappoint people. I didn't grow up necessarily playing video games. I grew up in India, and a PC and or a console was luxury. So those are not the luxuries I had. So I picked up games when I first, after grad school, after I moved to the US to come to grad school, and that's when I first got introduced to games. Now my entry into video games industry, and the industry is a lot bigger now than when I got in 15 years ago, and a lot more accessible. Back then, you either had to know someone or you had to work your way in. Like you join right out of college in any role you can get in, and that's how you learn through apprenticeship and got opportunities. Luckily for me, I got in when the first rush of free-to-play Facebook games was taking off. And Zynga back then and other companies, they were looking for people who are strong analytically but don't necessarily come from traditional gaming companies. And they really cared about, do you understand math and do you understand code? And I was decent at both of those. And so that was how I got into video games. And so it was, my first stop was Zynga. Zynga was still small, privately held, venture backed, but privately held. And I think it was more my mathematics skills, which got me into games. I think now it's different. The industry has grown 10x in last 15 years. So it's a very big industry. There are opportunities across the board. If you want to do AAA and high-end games, there are those companies. There are casual companies. I think it's also a lot easier to make your own games. AI will make it even easier, but making your own games than what was there in the past. So for people who are interested, I mean, you have a few options. One is selecting where you want to be, like what kind of games you want to make. Playing games and being passionate helps, but what's also important is understanding how these games work, like technically how they work, what is game design, and the overall structure of the industry. So I think learning about those is helpful, as you think about entering the industry.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of points there, and obviously games in and of itself is all about, at the fundamental level, it's animation, it's graphics, it's there's dynamics in there, there's physics, there's science, and there's math, and all of those things. And I think having a good foundation on that is a good avenue into that gaming industry. There's also other avenues of testing games, playing games, and sort of becoming part of that quality assurance team as well. Obviously, there's a lot of verification that needs to happen. But I think, to your point, the gaming industry is becoming massive, and I didn't realize how big this industry could potentially become. And I kind of make sense as well, not just because of the metaverse, but notwithstanding the metaverse, I think by itself the gaming industry is becoming much more significant, just in the way that people are looking for different types of entertainment. They're looking for interactions, especially with high-speed internet now, upgrades to hardware and software, being able to play against your friends and family members halfway around the world seamlessly is becoming much more important and much more engaging for society as well. So I have no doubt that sort of the gaming industry is going to continue to grow exponentially over the next couple of years. I think also go ahead.
Yeah, to your point, I think so. One, I'll just share. Games is 200 billion in revenue, and actually we don't realize it. It's 10 times bigger than Hollywood, and it's actually bigger than Hollywood, music, and even books combined. And as we spend more and more of our times online, it's a great way for people to reconnect with their friends and family, to explore and discover new things, new experiences. So and I agree. I think you mentioned it slightly. I think as the underlying technology improves, like you mentioned broadband, but I'll even say that in emerging markets, India and Africa, as 4G and then 5G starts to improve, some of these might jump to 6G ahead of us in the US. But like as the network infrastructure improves and the quality of smartphones and the graphics processor in the smartphones improve, you'll actually see a lot more people come online and play games.
Agreed. Let's talk quickly about sort of your background in engineering, but not necessarily in engineering itself, but also the career path you've taken. I think a lot of people listening to this are interested in gaming, some are interested in industries, but some of them are probably technical folks themselves, and they wanted to sort of learn more about what other aspects of a startup looks like and a tech company looks like. And you've successfully made the transition from an engineer into a product manager. And maybe you can sort of explain to me a little bit about what that journey was like, why you decided to go down that path, because I feel like, every person as they go through their career has to make decisions. They figure out, do they want to continue on the technical path, for example, or do they want to go ahead and take more of a product manager role or business development role? I think it's easier for engineers to go down that path, not necessarily product managers to go down into engineering. But I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for people out there to explore different alternatives in their career paths. For you, tying that in with gaming, but also your background in engineering and then your love for product, how did that journey unfold for you?
Yeah, no, totally. I think for me, going from engineering to product was, at least in the beginning, it was a bit forced rather than a choice. So I was in an engineering role after grad school at Microsoft. And my team, so it's part of Windows kernel team, which is a team which writes the, device drivers and HAL and like low-level operating system code on Windows. And my team did not have product managers. And someone had to do the job, and I was asked to do the job. So it was a bit of a nudge and a push, but I loved it. It's not the easiest transition to make. I'll say it wasn't the easiest transition to make. What I tell people now when they are thinking of, when people are technical and they're thinking of, well, I can be a software engineer, but I can also be a PM, is to start with, do you care more about figuring out what to do, like what product to build, what customers to go service, how to generate revenue, or do you actually care about problem solving, the how behind it? So I think of like product as what and engineering as how, like how to build it, like what interesting architectural choices you want to make, how do you want to design the whole system, write code, test it. So I think that's one way where, what do you like figuring out between what and how? The second thing I would say is also knowing what you are good at and where you will actually derive personal pleasure and satisfaction. And sometimes those two things don't match, especially early in the career, they don't match. Like you can actually, if you get good at something, instinctively you'll have more fun doing this thing, but you're not good at it. So that's something which only you can answer, of like, what can you be good at versus what you are doing today, and sort of which will help you get more internal satisfaction. I would say those are probably the things to think about between engineering and product. And again, like my journey was, the first entry into product was a nudge. I've gone back and forth between managing engineering teams or being a PM or managing engineering and product teams, both simultaneously. So yeah, I mean, it's a different problem set, slightly different problem set you're tackling.
I know it can be difficult for engineers to go into a PM role, just because they've been so used to becoming an IC, an individual contributor, and they're very technically minded as well, and they just want to, get the job done, and it's sort of the how for them, as you already sort of alluded to. But also going into a product manager role is a bit of a mind shift as well, because you are interacting with other groups of folks in the business. It's not just other engineers you're engaging with. You're engaging with, a lot of other business development, marketing, sales, and all those things. Is trying to sort of get the product out there, and then now your job is sort of evolved into describing the features and the wants of what that product should look like from a product level. But then I guess the advantage of that is that you do have a technical background. You're able to understand what the implementation is going to look like as well, so you can empathize with a lot of the engineers. And I find that that's quite nice to have. Personally, from my own experience, going into a PM role from an engineering, you definitely see both worlds, and you can understand the mindsets of different groups of people. So that certainly helps with the transition. And as I mentioned, I don't think it's necessarily for everyone, but I hope that people who are interested in doing it certainly should go out there and ask for an opportunity to explore these sort of paths, because it is a really fascinating area to sort of learn more about feature release, product development, product design, and really engaging with different groups of people as well. I wanted to take this obviously to another topic that I'm really interested in about is some of your early work with Oculus, with Amazon, and now what you're doing with Skills. But just from a sort of a career perspective, you joined Facebook when it was called Facebook previously, and you joined their Oculus division, and it was sort of early days. Can you explain a little bit about what the feel was like during that time? What did you experience? Obviously being involved in something significant like Oculus, especially being integrated into the Facebook ecosystem. What was that journey like for you and for the people around you?
No, totally. So yeah, I was quite early on. So I joined Oculus after Oculus was acquired by Facebook. So the team was about 100 or so people. I now hear there are 30,000 people working on these initiatives, but it was about 100 people back then. And we had DK1, Developer Kit 1 out for a few developers when I joined. Back in that day, there were a lot of, we had more questions than we had answers. And this was true for both the strategy of, are we going to make a really high-end device, which is what Apple is doing now with 3500, really, really high-end, or are we going to make a low-end device, which is what Google did back in the day with cardboard, or somewhere in the middle? Like, what's the right technology price point which we can offer, where we can find actually product market fit? So a lot of ambiguity there. There was also a lot of just open questions on, is this a gaming device? Are we building a gaming console? Or are we building a video entertainment device? Or is it a social device? Like, is it like social interactions and, video conferencing on steroids? And there was also, open questions on who are going to be the first developers who will build for this. Like, who will actually take a plunge and say, okay, I'm actually going to go, invest my money and time to build applications for virtual reality. So back in the day, I would say there was a lot of strategic ambiguity. Now, from a product and engineering standpoint, I can say this now, and now that we are on the other side, you run into these moments and it's like, okay, we have to ship this in next 12 months and we are far from ready. And I'm sure some of the people know about the mythical man month, where it's like, okay, you have 12 months left. You have to get some of this software built and these products done, but you don't have the luxury of hiring more people. Not necessarily because of budget, because just the timeline does not allow for rapidly growing the team and onboarding them and training them. So we had a pretty skeletal crew which actually built and launched Oculus. And there were times where we felt like, man, will this happen? Like, can we make the date? And there were countless weekends and long nights to get to the first launch. So, back in the day, it was very, very exciting time with lots of open questions, but a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun time looking back. Um, as I reflect back, I think one thing which I do think Facebook got right is experimentation. Um, like we tried, mobile VR, and we tried high-end PC VR, and we did a fully integrated VR device all in one. And all of that early experimentation helped the company and helped us narrow down what form factor will scale. And we did a lot of experimentation with content on, let's try games, let's try movies, let's try curated VR experiences around events and live performances, streaming like NCAA March Madness into VR. And I think all of those, again, experiments also on the content side help us understand on hardware, what's the right form factor, what's the right content, uh, and what are, frankly, also the limits of where the technology is at.
I think there's definitely a lot to be said about the journey of where Oculus has gone, but also the the work that's been put into this space. And I know that Facebook and now Meta have gotten a lot of slack recently because of their massive investment in the space, but at the same time, you mentioned about giving them credit for experimentation, and they're obviously well known for moving very fast and just trying to see what works, what doesn't work. And I think there's a lot to be said about where this could potentially go. But having said that, though, I think there's also the now proliferation of VR headsets, and you mentioned Apple, the Vision Pro as well. With Facebook, I know that you haven't been there since, but with their strategy and where they're going, do you see them continuing to double down on the VR space, or do you think that it's something that they need to sort of reassess and figure out exactly what are they trying to achieve here? Because they've developed quite a few products and they've developed a few experiences as well, but nothing has really stuck. I feel like for me, the Oculus space is still quite nascent in that sense, and there is still a lot of experimentation going on. So for you, how do you see Oculus becoming more successful and more well known? And I know that Mark Zuckerberg has been talking about investing more resources into the VR space. So how do you sort of see Oculus and now Meta being more successful in the near future?
Yeah, let me contrast a bit of where Oculus is at now or Facebook is at now versus Apple. And I think both of them they have a slightly different hypothesis. I think when I look at Apple, I look at them basically creating the best device they can, and it doesn't matter the price. So again, they really went after, integrating the best technology, whether it's the lenses or the screens, the form factor, the audio, bringing together their iOS type applications and capabilities into it. And they priced it at 3,500, which might be like 4,000 right after taxes. So they went really high end. And the way I look at them is, I think their thesis is, can we make a few customers, a niche or a specific customer segment, like this high-end device so much that they don't want to give it up? And I think they're certainly going after, if we can get one segment to want it and create that desire and want, then they can over time, my guess is reduce price and bring it to more and more people. And I liken it to like how Tesla was built. They build a sports car and then they build a high-end luxury car, and now they are mass market with Model 3. So at least that's how I view where Apple is at and where they're going with it. I doubt they'll sell more than a few 100,000, maybe 1 million units with their first generation of devices. Facebook, on the other hand, I think the vision always was, how do we get VR to 1 billion people? And I think there was always this practical choices of what hardware, what form factor, what use cases can we pack, but it stays overall under a price point of, let's say, $500 or something, right? Like, I believe Quest now is $299, and Quest 3 will be priced similarly in that range, maybe slightly higher in the end. So I think it's a different strategy which they have stuck with. The interesting thing will be that, does the technological innovation and the costs coming down, does it advantage Facebook because they're already out there building this install base? And install base has two benefits. Like, one is you build a brand, your customers start to use your product, but it also helps jumpstart the developer ecosystem, the content ecosystem around it. Versus Apple, which is like, we don't need to win in year 1, we can wait till year 5, but we really want to create something high end. So it'll be interesting if this plays out like Android and iOS, or something else like PC and Mac, or something else. So I look at both of them going at it distinctly. Everything I've heard or I know of, and again, I've not been at Meta for many years, is that they're continuing to invest, and that they see a big opportunity here.
Yeah. And, one thing, you mentioned Apple as well. One thing that Apple does incredibly well is marketing, and they know how to create hype. And so I would say that even with Apple coming with the Vision Pro, I think it's also a good thing indirectly for Facebook, because I feel like with Apple, they're able to put something like the Vision Pro or the notion of VR into a mass market. They can get the eyeballs as they need to at least get people to know about that this product. Yes, probably not everyone is going to buy the Vision Pro, but at least everyone's going to know about what it is, what it's capable of as well, and that's going to put more of a spotlight on the metaverse, on the VR space, on this entire ecosystem. And I feel that's probably a good thing for Facebook in the long term, because it's going to generate a lot more interest and figure out, okay, if perhaps Apple can put a name to this, then maybe Facebook can piggyback on that wave a little bit and sort of work with each other, compete obviously, with a healthy dose of competition, but obviously get more people aware of what this entire sector is all about. So I think it's really exciting to see what that looks like. Very quickly also, and this is something that I didn't know too much about, but Amazon is also gone down the gaming path as well, and obviously you had some experience there as well, trying to sort of launch that effort. What was that journey like for you to be part of Amazon, and what was the mandate for them versus Apple versus Facebook? Did they share similar things and visions, or did they want to go down a completely different path?
Yeah, so Amazon is, when I got there, we were trying to do, and I believe it's still true, more or less, they're trying to do two things with video games. One is focused much more on players, where creating, video games themselves. So Amazon started a division called Amazon Game Studios, which is making games. They've released a couple of games already. They bought Twitch, which is community around games, streamers, and now it's funny, actually Twitch has also grown beyond games. So I think there were efforts on B2C of direct to players, whether it's making your own games or making uh, community around games with Twitch. And then the second effort, which the effort I led, was how do we create a platform where which game developers will use to make video games and to scale video games and make them available worldwide. And that effort was AWS, and that's the effort I was leading. Um, and again, our thinking was that that video games are only going to grow, and if we can do a great job of providing tools for game developers to make better games and scale these games to everyone on the world, there is actually an opportunity here. At the same time, like with consumer offerings, making video games ourselves and Twitch, running Twitch ourselves, like those almost serve as internal use cases for what we are building. So it was quite synergistic from a strategy standpoint, where we'll build tools and we'll also build consumer experiences. Um, Much like Oculus, I think it took a while to get those things right. I mean, making video games on the consumer side, making video games is really hard. And, I think all of this is documented. It took Amazon Game Studios a while to get it right. And the reason is it's not just a matter of do you have an idea of what you want to build? It's can you build it while fully utilizing what Amazon has to offer and build it within Amazon, which again is not known as a gaming company. So that team had just a Herculean effort to actually incubate Amazon Game Studios. And as you would expect, some initial games didn't quite work as well. And that's okay, because that's the nature of the beast. Like, video games are hit driven, are hard. But at the same time, Amazon took a lot of flack in the media when their games didn't work out, because people just hold them, rightly so, at such high bar that, like, of course it has to work, but it doesn't work that way with video games. Like, you have to try 4 or 5 times to get a hit. By the way, like, people who are video games insiders, they know this intimately. So I'm excited for where the Game Studios team landed and where Twitch is at. On the platform side, on AWS side, again, there were similar challenges where, okay, like, which which segment of game developers do we build for? Do we build a game engine? Do we build services? We ended up doing everything. What we learned was building a game engine with a skeletal team and being so behind incumbents, Unreal and Unity, is really, really, really hard. And so once we built the engine, we knew there is a need for a third game engine beyond Epic Games, Unreal, and Unity. But, like, for us to just, like, completely get to the feature set they have on our own will take years. And so we took a different approach of, like, let's build the core technology behind the engine and let's actually work with the community. So we ended up open sourcing it with Linux Foundation. It's actually one of the largest open source project period. It's called Open3D Initiative. And that has actually worked a lot better, where there is a lot more traction and interest in that project, where the community is picking that up. On the game services, cloud services side, we build a lot of services, from cloud gaming to building services for large-scale games. What I did find building those was how much interest there is in games technology outside of games. So we had customers in machine learning, robotics, and even public sector who wanted to use the same technology which is being used by game developers and which we had built for game developers at AWS to be used in other applications. And this, comes back to the point, Barry, which we were talking about earlier, that like metaverse will grow outside of games, and we are starting to see some examples of it. But we are also starting to see the same technologies used to make games being used elsewhere.
I feel like Amazon, they're obviously a behemoth, and they have the resources and the financial resources, energy, human capital as well to experiment as well. And I think that's a testament to why these large corporations are able to do this as well. But I also get a sense that Amazon are looking for avenues to really think about what this industry could look like down the road. And obviously you mentioned there's been a few faults in their past, but now they're starting to figure out exactly what's making it work. But I also get a sense maybe down the road they might have like a managed service for a game engine, like the way they would do it for, Kafka or some sort of, database service. They have infrastructure on their side. So it wouldn't be surprising if they were able to build gaming infrastructure that they could use as a service, and then allow other people to come in and build games on top of AWS. So maybe there's something there.
So Barry, we actually build a few of these services already. So like to what you're saying, some parts of this engine, there are a handful of services which we had built already for game server hosting and scaling game servers, or running these games in the cloud and streaming them down, or services which enable you to build large-scale persistent world games. There's a service called SimSpace Weaver. And so, yeah, the company is already moving in that direction. I had a chance to build and launch some of these services myself. But yeah, I think cloud and gaming, that story is only starting and will continue to play out over the next decade.
Yeah, exactly. I know that you've been working in a whole bunch of all of these companies for quite some time now, and one of the things that I'm interested in to learn about is some of the learnings that you've been able to gain from working in some of these large companies, working on some of these amazing projects as well. You've also been able to occupy quite a few positions throughout your career as well, from being an engineer, individual contributor, to being a product manager, a leader, a manager. How do you, are there any takeaways that you've been able to get out of all of these experiences that have allowed you to obviously move up in your career, but also get a better sense of what it's like to work in a technology company, and some of the things that perhaps other people can sort of learn from you as well?
Yeah, let's see. So there is a lot we can cover here. I think let me focus on like leadership and like what it is to grow as a leader, because the moment you are a little bit more experienced, whether you are an IC or whether you're managing 1,000 people, like it comes down to like how you lead people around you. And different people have different definitions of what is leadership. For me, what I found useful was, can you scale and can you get the right culture, decisions, and results when you are not directly involved, when you are not in the room? And so for me, the learnings I had, and both at AWS, Meta, and companies before that, I was scaling and leading teams of up to 300 people or more, was how do you make sure that three things happen. One is that decisions are made with the team having context on vision and direction, that the right decisions are made, because you can't physically be with everyone all the time. The second is that people are showing up with the right attitude, right culture, and they are interacting, working with each other in context of that right culture, that you have the right culture. And this goes everything from the quality of work you are doing to how you are interacting with each other, how you are resolving differences. And the third one is like the results. Like, are the teams holding themselves to a high bar of what it means to achieve great results? I mean, I think that's the essence of, for me, like, are you doing your job as a leader, and is your leadership working? Like, are those things generally working well? The one part I learned, among lessons, the one lesson which I learned was just communication. Like, you as a leader have to continue to like the vision, the purpose of the team, why we are here repeatedly, because as much as it feels boring to you to repeat it, you have to do that in order to achieve the three things I mentioned.
Got it. I feel like there's the communication part is becoming, well, it is incredibly important as well. And especially as we spoke about moving from an engineer to a product manager, engaging with more people as well, engaging with different parts of the business. Communication is becoming more important as you start to go into these sort of roles. And I feel like communication can sometimes be underestimated, and I feel like it's a skill that is required but not necessarily focused on. And I feel like also in school and in college and even in the workplace, they didn't really emphasize communication skills for all folks. So I think it's incredibly important that as you mentioned, communication is one of those aspects where you're trying to really engage and really hone your skill set, so you can start to interact with different types of people, start to create empathy for other people as well, because it's not always easy to sort of interact with different types of personalities as well. So I think from that perspective, being able to develop, a lot of leadership comes from communication, and being able to listen, as you alluded to as well, trying to do what are they upset about. And I think that gives you more the ability to sort of be more empathetic towards those sort of types of groups of people. One thing that I wanted to also talk about was just about some of the, I guess, as you're starting to get into these types of positions, you're not just leadership, but also just from working in these companies that are working on really, really ambitious projects. And these are not run-of-the-day easy projects that you encounter on a daily basis. These are hard, ambitious goals. How is that communicated through the vision? I think vision and culture is really important, but how do you make sure that you continually inspire people to work on the hard stuff, even when days are bad and people are feeling down because sometimes something doesn't work, and it's they've been doing this for such a long time? How do you continue to inspire people to get out of bed every day and go to work and continue to work on this initiative?
Yeah, I think, and this is where I think being, so I'll talk about both the meta here, but also the tactics. I think the meta is getting people, like reminding to people and getting people excited about the core problem or the opportunity you're going after and how that will change the world for your customers. Not everything changes the world for everyone, but for the customers you're building towards, how it will actually change their life, their workflow, make them more efficient, productive, faster. I think continuing to sort of hammer that message regularly, because at the end of the day, people need a purpose. Like, there are good days, bad days, and it's really easy to bolt when on a bad day you feel like you are also purposeless. You're not working on something which is meaningful. So I think that probably has the disproportionate impact or effect when it comes to inspiring people. The second one is, I would say, there is a balance between holding people to a high standard where you expect a lot out of them and you want only the best work, but balancing it with empathy where things just don't go per plan, and it's okay. Like it's okay. People shouldn't beat themselves overly over it when things don't go well or things go sideways, and giving them the confidence that they still have the trust. Because what also causes disillusionment is when things don't go right, and especially in a large company when um engineer or a manager of engineers feels like, are they going to get blamed? Is this their last day at work? And I think just making sure when that happens to identify them and give them a pat, and saying even small words like, I have your back, I trust you, it's okay, things happen, I know you'll fix it, I think is important. Now there are times where you don't want to say that because that'll not be true and authentic. But most of the time, I think you know people are amazing. They're doing their best work, and things happen, and you want to empathize. Um, those are the things I've found useful. I'll also share things which I don't think work, but we got too caught up is things like free lunches, and I'll give you a massage, and the kitchen is fully stocked. Uh, all of those are just nice things, but they don't. I have not found them to necessarily inspire the right people to do their best work.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that mentality. Let's quickly switch gears again because I think this is something to talk about, and obviously, given the times, it's incredibly important as well. Obviously, over the past couple of years, AI has played a significant role in sweeping across some of these sectors, not just gaming, but other parts of industries as well. But specifically in gaming, AI is taking quite a bit of an impact, and it's making a bit of headway into the gaming space, not just with traditional AI, but with generative AI as well. What have you seen yourself when it comes to AI, especially in terms of some of the developments and innovations happening across in AI, in tying in with gaming, but also where do you see this going as well? Obviously, AI is going to completely revolutionize a lot of things. Gaming being one of those things, but obviously being on the ground yourself, what are your expectations and what do you see happening for gaming when it comes to AI?
Yeah, totally. So, AI to video games is nothing entirely new. And so let me actually go back and then we'll come to the present. Things like, decision trees um, for NPC, coding or scripting NPC behavior, pathfinding, procedurally generating parts of landscape. Like that's been with games for a while. Um, I think what you saw with advent of machine learning, supervised learning 10, 15 years ago was how AI started to change personalization in games, personalization, marketing, and level tuning. Where you and I, if we are playing a single player game, it's like we see slightly different levels optimized for us or slightly different offers. So you saw that in sort of last, starting, I would say 10 years ago. And that changed gaming in a meaningful way. It helped game developers make a lot more money, optimize their game much, much better for engagement and retention. And I think now where we are at is with generative AI, where it's not just about optimization, but it's also about creation. And what's exciting and also uh, more easy to see is that how you can actually create game assets with AI, which much faster than what you can. Like like the same artist can now work 30-40% much more productively because he can do up for front work of concepting and
Mm-hmm.
putting like pen to paper much more faster. So I mean, I think there are going to be quite a bit of gains when it comes to like asset generation around games, and I think that will enable game developers to do more with less. It'll also enable smaller developers to make much higher quality content than what they are capable of. Um, but what I'm actually really excited about is what generative AI can do when it comes to like creating style of games which we haven't seen before. And the reason I say that is when I look at generative AI, all the shortcomings of generative AI, which we talk about today, that it's stochastic, it's not consistent. You can give it the same prompt and you'll get two different answers. Sometimes it quote unquote hallucinates. They don't work for mission critical applications, right? Like, if whether you are in enterprise or sales or making big decisions, you can't use those. But for video games, if you can harness it for delight, where where it makes the game a lot more serendipitous, it makes you playing the same game over and over again because each time you play it, it's something slightly different. So I actually think generative AI has this, and transformer-based generative AI, these models, they have this feature of serendipity. It's a bug in other settings, but actually a delight for games. And so I think, uh, beyond cost and efficiency, you'll see invention of a completely new genre, new style of games which we have not seen before. Uh, and I think that part is, again, like to me, very very exciting of where this can go. And you're starting to see some of these examples, at least in video space with the Runway ML. There are like lots of examples coming from them on generation of videos. In games, you're seeing bunch of companies who are solving for asset generation or solving for NPC behavior of NPCs and characters. Um, you're also starting to see generation of 3D content from 2D. Now, 3D is really hard. Like, I mean, I think 2D is hard, but is getting better. Like tools like Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, you can see the improvement in their quality in not just for abstract images, but even for finer things like faces and fingers. And but 3D is further behind, and 3D is hard. One, because it's computationally much more expensive than 2D. Two, there isn't enough 3D data out there to actually train and fine tune these models to generate 3D data. So I think that's hard. You are starting to see more progress there. There are like a whole bunch of startups which are using a combination of, not just inferring from 2D images, but also videos, using video training to tune their models to generate from text to 3D or from 2D images to 3D. So I think that's going to be exciting over the next few years. So yeah, I'm incredibly excited of this current wave of AI and generative AI. I think we are at the cusp of invention of new style of games, enabling lot more people to make higher quality games than what was possible, um, and also create games which adapt to you and create content for you in real time. That's for a little further down, but yeah, this it's incredibly exciting what's going on in the industry.
Yeah, no, I mean, well said. There's a lot of stuff happening right now, and you touched on the idea of being able to choose your own journey or choose your own adventure, right? And how AI can play a significant role in optimizing and perhaps even randomizing certain outcomes for different players and different scenarios, and trying to optimize for those sort of things as well. I definitely am really excited about where this is going to go, and there's no doubt that the gaming industry is going to have a significant impact that's going to elevate it even more in conjunction with the metaverse, in conjunction with everything that we spoke about as well. So I'm really excited for that. Let's quickly just, I love to sort of just go into the some of the things that you can provide in terms of advice for those who are trying to do what you're doing. Not necessarily exactly the same, but if a lot of people are listening to this right now or watching this and they feel like I'm pretty good at math, I'm pretty good at engineering, and I love games here and there, but I want to be more involved in what this potentially could look like, not just from gaming, but maybe from AI as well. What are some sort of advice and tips you can give to people to sort of get at least get their foot in front of through the door, and then see what happens next? But I think accessing the front door is probably the hardest for a lot of people. So are there any tips to sort of get people moving in the right direction?
Yeah, no, totally. One thing I'll say is with what we see, especially on the intersection of AI and video games, is we're about to enter an age where lot many people can make their own video games. And I would say, if this is an industry of interest, is to start playing. Like there are a lot of interesting GitHub projects which people open source, provide their source code, especially if you're technically inclined or an engineer, is to get involved in what you find interesting, projects around video games. The second one I would say is, if you are a designer or an artist, is again to look at what we, to take advantage of the shift and start playing around with all of these tools. So those are two things I'll say on how you can get your own hands dirty and, in some way be your own entrepreneur, be your own boss of instead of working somewhere, making your own video games. Now, on the other hand, the more traditional part of finding an opportunity in video games, I think, again, all of the companies in video game space, if they are not using AI or generative AI tooling themselves, they will need people who understand these tools and how to harness these tools well. So again, getting educated will provide an opportunity. Second is, I would say, playing video games, and this is what I feel like matters the most to game companies, that are you actually a passionate player? And you don't have to win esports tournaments or play for 1,000 hours, but being able to genuinely demonstrate that, look, these are the 5 games I play, and I've played them quite a bit, and I have competed in those. It doesn't matter if you are interviewing at those companies. I think being able to demonstrate that will go a long way. The last one, I would say, the third one on the traditional route, is I have seen, many of the game developer and gaming focused conferences have a place for people on the show floor to come and learn about gaming industry, or to connect with potential people in the industry who are recruiting and hiring. And so I think that's the third avenue, I would say, for people.
No, that's great advice for those. And there are a lot of resources that are available out there, conferences, meetups, a lot of open source projects as well, and just sort of learning a bit more about, access to these podcasts, and everything is online nowadays as well. So I think there's a lot of people who can easily access this information and start to take action in sort of figuring out the best way to access the industry. I wanted to finish off with some pertinent questions that I typically ask, but I think this is something that I've gained a lot from speaking to a lot of other people, but also what the audience has gained from speaking to a lot of other people. And for me, one of the questions that I had for you was, how do you approach sort of complex and hard decisions and problems in your life, not just professionally, but also in your personal life as well? But also, do you use any mental models? Do you approach these sort of decisions in a specific sort of way, or use any sort of frameworks? I think that's something interesting that I've always been interested to learn from other people.
Yeah, no, totally. Slightly different for personal versus professional, but I'll share sort of the three things which I often come back to, and you weigh those differently depending on if it's a professional decision or personal one. The first one is, and I read and heard about this from Jeff Bezos at Amazon, where he had this thing we called regret minimization framework, where if you have to make a decision or take an action, would you regret not doing it? And if you do, then you should go do it. And so and especially in personal life, and more personal, whether it's career decisions or family decisions, like I often come back to like this regret minimization framework for me. So that's one I use. The second one I come back to, and I used it both in product decisions and personal, professional, is, will it matter in 10 years? Like, is what I'm about to do or a decision I'm about to make, will it has consequences in 10 years or 5 years? Like, take a long period of time. If it doesn't, then it's okay to get it wrong, but make it quickly and get going. So, it almost takes the pressure off when you're faced with a situation of like, what truly matters, and is this really meaningful? The last one is, and this again, I've used it effectively both in professional settings and also personal settings, is, what are the values and purpose? And, so grounding, because when you're making decisions, like no matter what framework you pick, frameworks are hungry for data. Sometimes you just don't have data. And so, I found it useful to go back and ground myself in, okay, what are the values? Like, what are my values? What are the values of this project, this team? And what's the purpose? Like, why are we engaged in this initiative? And that helps weed out a lot of noise, which masquerades sometimes itself as lack of data. So, I think those are the three things which I've used.
Great. I think the regret minimization one I've definitely heard, and I've used as well, and it is something that definitely resonates with me, because you're going to make a lot of decisions in your life, and the one thing that you don't want to do is fill them with regrets, and I should have done this or I should have done that. So I think it's pertinent to everyone, not just from, no matter what industry you're in, no matter who you are. I think living the best life that you can, and living it in a fulfilling way, because there will always be challenges along the way. It's not necessarily living a happy life, but living a fulfilling life, and making sure that all those decisions you did throughout your life have been worth it. And if you were to do it again, you'd do exactly the same thing because you had no regrets. So I think that's something that I feel very strongly about. What is the best way for people to connect with you if they wanted to reach out?
Yeah, the easiest is to actually follow me on LinkedIn. So I am not that active on Twitter, but following me on LinkedIn is the easiest way to keep up with what I'm up to.
I'll put all of that in the description notes below, so that people can reach out anytime. But for the most part, thank you so much, Vatsal, for providing your time. And it was really great to speak to you and learn more about the metaverse, gaming, AI, and everything in between. So thank you so much.
Of course, Barry. Thank you.